Why does society call you selfish or antisocial the moment you become authentic and protect your energy? No one prepares you for the moment the masks start to fall, for the exhaustion of watching the little social theater unfolding around you. This is not a dramatic moment of illumination. It is something more subtle. It is as if you are adjusting your eyes after leaving a dark movie theater. At first, the clarity is blinding, almost painful, but the truth is there is no going back to that comfortable darkness. You see the hidden agenda behind helpfulness, the performance in every interaction, the search for attention in the repeated drama. That is why you step back. And that is why they judge you. Because your authenticity becomes a mirror reflecting their performance. This is the price of spiritual clarity. Solitude is not punishment. It is freedom. There is a point of no return on the journey of self-knowledge. A threshold that, once crossed, dissolves the illusion of the world as it was sold to you. We were taught to seek connection at any cost, to build deeper bonds, to embrace the social fairy tale of harmonious coexistence. But the reality is that the more attention you pay, the more you sharpen your inner listening, the more you drift away from the crowd. You begin to realize that much of what is sold as connection is, in fact, performance. You observe manipulation tactics becoming clear as day. What do you do when you realize that most interactions are empty, a script everyone is reading to fill the silence and get something? Society then turns against you. It acts as if there is something wrong with you wanting your space. They say you are no longer fun, that you are being negative, that you need to be more relaxed. But the only thing that has truly changed is that you now see through what you can no longer unsee. The awakening of consciousness is rarely a moment of pure happiness. In fact, it is an encounter with discomfort. The initial phase of this transformation is marked by the loss of comfortable ignorance. It is the transition from the world of social fantasy, where intentions are pure and connections are unconditional, to the acceptance of naked reality. The clarity that emerges is not about what you must do, but about what you can no longer unsee. What is disturbing is not the darkness of others, but the fact that once you have adjusted your eyes, there is no going back. You begin to question the value of the social fairy tale that was sold to you, where happiness lies in conformity and belonging is achieved through the dilution of your authentic self. This new perception transforms innocence into discernment. You realize that the small red flags you ignored, trying to believe the best in people, were, in fact, the first signs of a pattern. The truth is that spiritual clarity does not make you immune to suffering, but it makes you less surprised by it. You begin to understand that the pain of seeing is preferable to the blindness of comfort. The silent wisdom that emerges is that the inauthenticity of others is not your responsibility, but accepting that it exists and protecting yourself is the first act of ethical self-care. What in your life are you still trying to ignore to maintain the peace of others? This new vision, however, comes at a cost. It forces us to step out of our own internal drama to observe the drama of others. And that is where human behavior reveals itself as a master class in metamorphosis. The human being, in their search for acceptance and security, is a master of metamorphosis. You begin to see the cracks when you witness the speed with which people change their entire personality depending on who is in the room. The charming person with the boss becomes cruel with the subordinate. The loving person with the parents becomes cynical with friends. Carl Jung called this social mask the persona. But what he perhaps did not emphasize enough is the exhaustion of those who are watching the small social theater every day. You are no longer on stage, but in the audience, and you realize that everyone is wearing one, desperately seeking attention, validation, control, security. You observe the helpful woman who is, in reality, buying loyalty, or the one who seeks compliments through humble bragging, hoping you will take the bait of validation. The most frightening thing is not the hypocrisy, but the depth of unconsciousness. Most do not even know they are acting. They have forgotten who they are beneath the costume. When you manage to see the pattern, the fear behind the aggression, the insecurity behind the boasting, the game is over. And that knowledge becomes a painful, but necessary, filter for your mental health. It is the discernment that emerges from the psychology of the soul. The hardest consequence of seeing the world as a stage is realizing that your discernment leads you to a bitter predictability, that the breakdown of trust is not an accident, but a destiny mapped out by patterns of self-protection. The more you understand human motivations, the less you can trust the idea of unconditionality. The awakening of consciousness reveals that betrayal ceases to be a shock and becomes predictable. This is not cynicism, but emotional lucidity, a philosophical wisdom that emerges from attentive observation. The grief is not for the pain of the action itself, but for the death of the illusion. The disappointment was, in fact, merely inevitable, as the patterns are always the same. You begin to see the friend who always has an excuse when you need them, but expects immediate availability, or the family member who uses guilt as their main communication tool. You realize that the most basic law of coexistence is self-protection and self-interest. People, under pressure, will throw you under the bus to save face or use your vulnerabilities against you the moment you fail to meet their needs. They may love the idea of you, the version you represented in the honeymoon phase, but not your true self. And with the end of that illusion, we are forced to reevaluate the very nature of our coexistence. What remains of human communication when integrity fades? Silence reveals the emptiness of small talk. When you develop inner listening, you hear beyond the words and perceive the script running in the interlocutor's head. The question, "How are you?" is no longer an invitation to truth, but the fulfillment of a social ritual. They do not want the real answer, they want the expected performance. "I'm fine, and you?" Thus, everyone can move on, pretending they connected. The risk of giving the honest answer is breaking the script and forcing the other person out of their comfort zone. The timing of social interactions becomes an alarming fact. 30 seconds in the elevator, the exact time needed to scan items at the checkout, the quick question in the office kitchen to fill the silence. It is all script, all performance, all empty. It is the hollow echo in every exchange, the evidence that most people are more interested in their own narrative than in yours. The emotional fatigue we feel is the exhaustion of participating in this charade. The freedom of the conditioned mind requires us to stop feeding this theater, even if it means the awkwardness of unfulfilled silence. Exhaustion is not just in what is said, but in what is done. Because, if words are an empty script, often helpfulness and the desire to assist also carry a hidden agenda. Purity of intention is a rarity, and philosophical wisdom teaches us to observe what is behind the veil of kindness. Helpfulness, when devoid of integrity, transforms into subtle power. The gesture of helping becomes a way to establish superiority or create debt. The phrase, "Let me help you with that," can subtly be a means of building an emotional current account, an asset to be collected in the future. It is the moment you realize that every favor has an invisible price. The person who always supports you is, in fact, scoring points. "Remember when I helped you move?" becomes leverage in future disagreements. "After everything I did for you," turns into emotional blackmail the instant you try to set a boundary. This discovery is crucial for your emotional maturity, as it allows you to separate unconditional love, rare and valuable, from conditional exchange, common and exhausting. The ethics of presence requires us to observe the calculation behind every gesture, recognizing that not all kindness is a gift, but rather a condition. The fatigue of transactional relationships does not end with the exchange of favors. It deepens when we realize that attention, for many, has become the most valuable prize, feeding a vicious cycle, the addiction to victimization. Victimization is often an unconscious control strategy and an addiction to attention. You realize your coworker complains about the same problem for the 100th time, not because they seek cure or solutions, but because they want attention and an audience for their drama. When you offer advice, sympathy, or try to help brainstorm, they subtly refuse. The complaint is the most valuable asset, as it guarantees permanence at the center of attention. This is masked existential emptiness. For these people, identity is tied to suffering. Solving the problem would mean losing the narrative that guarantees them external validation. Your role in this script is to be the unpaid therapist. The psychology of the soul teaches us that the refusal to participate in this drama is not a lack of compassion, but an act of ethical discernment. We cannot solve what the other person does not want to solve. True kindness to the present moment is the refusal to feed the addiction of others. It is this exhaustive awareness that you are just an audience for the drama of others that leads us to the next and most vital step, the rescue of our inner field. Because emotional energy is finite, and its protection is the highest act of ethics. Emotional energy is not infinite. It is a current account with well-defined limits. Each interaction makes a deposit or a withdrawal from that reserve. And most of the time, the people who seek you are the so-called energy vampires. They come to you in moments of difficulty, dump their problems in your lap, absorb your attention, and disappear until they need the next emotional dose. Your role, until then, has been that of the unpaid therapist in the lives of others. The ethics of energy emerges when you refuse to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. This is the point where self-care becomes a practice of presence and not a cliché. It is a kindness to the present moment, recognizing that the finiteness of your emotional bandwidth demands the discernment of no. Genuine compassion does not require your sacrifice, but your integrity. You can offer empathy without the obligation to fix the chaos of others, preserving your living soul. But this act of self-preservation, this refusal to set yourself on fire, does not go unnoticed. It generates a direct conflict. Because the moment you establish your boundary, the other person's reaction is inevitable. When you finally establish a boundary, you are issuing a decree of inner sovereignty. And this decree invariably provokes a reaction in those who depended on your imbalance. The paradox is that your peace threatens the chaos of others. It is at this moment that self-care is labeled as selfishness, and the refusal to facilitate the dysfunction of others is seen as cruel. The uncomfortable truth is that your integrity becomes a mirror. Your authenticity reflects the performance of others. They do not like what they see. Your refusal to play the social game forces them to face their own lack of boundaries and dependence on your energy. That is why they call you antisocial, serious, or negative. The test of autonomy lies precisely in your ability to sustain your boundary without guilt. Their reaction does not speak about you. It reveals their respect for your truth. This pressure to return to conformity is proof that your peace threatens the chaos of others. But it is precisely this pressure that pushes us towards the most radical and liberating choice of all, the paradox of isolation. Solitude, for the awakened soul, is not the absence of people, but the absence of performance. The truly painful isolation is being surrounded by people who do not see you, who are only interested in the role you play in their drama. Chosen solitude is a sacred retreat. It is when isolation stops feeling like a punishment and starts feeling like freedom. It is in your silent space that you can finally just be. No one is manipulating you, projecting insecurities, or demanding you fix their problems. Silence is not empty. It is full of possibilities, full of peace, full of your own thoughts that are not being invalidated. You realize that solitude is not the consolation prize for those who cannot relate. It is the prize for those who have discovered that most relationships are not worth the energy they drain. It is a choice of integrity and energy retrieval. Authentic solitude thus becomes a sacred fortress where we reconnect. And it is from this solid foundation that we are ready for the final stage of the journey, the conscious choice of truth and the definitive renunciation of the illusion of the crowd. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard already warned us, the crowd is untruth. The relentless pursuit of belonging requires the sacrifice of the authentic self. Conformity is a silent negotiation in which you trade your inner truth for social acceptance. The cost of that sacrifice is existential emptiness. You can be everywhere, at every party, in every conversation, but the absence of yourself is a pain that no external approval can fill. Integrity is the refusal to transform or dilute yourself to fit in. The awakening of consciousness reveals that most people are choosing approval over growth. They want you to laugh at unfunny jokes, to be impressed by humble bragging, to participate in cruel gossip. When you refuse to play these games, you honor your purpose. The only validation that matters is the one that comes from your inner listening, and not the applause of the crowd. You cannot save those who choose illusion, but you can save yourself by stopping the self-emptying. And the most powerful tool to sustain this integrity, this refusal to participate in the charade, is, ironically, the shortest and most difficult word to say, the superpower of no. No is the superpower of spiritual autonomy. It is the most powerful affirmation of presence and integrity. The real challenge is learning to say it without justifications, excuses, or guilt. The test of autonomy is this. The need to explain yourself is the residue of the belief that you owe your energy to the world. But you do not. You owe your truth and your energy to yourself. By saying no authentically, you are stopping the performance machine that keeps everyone comfortable in their illusions. You stop being the supporting actor in the play of their lives. This refusal to participate in the charade forces the other person to take responsibility for their own existential restlessness. Their reaction to your boundary is the final test. It reveals how much they respect your truth. If your no is met with anger or manipulation, you did not lose a friend. You gained clarity about the real nature of that connection. Sustaining that no is an act of discernment. And the great irony is that, by rejecting inauthentic connections, you do not become more alone. You become a filter, preparing your inner field for the rarity of genuine intimacy. The tragedy of seeing people clearly is realizing how superficial most connections are. But the triumph of choosing authentic solitude is that you are no longer willing to settle for falsified intimacy. Your authenticity becomes a powerful filter, repelling the superficial and attracting the rare. The rarity of genuine intimacy lies in finding those who do not care about your performance, but who value your depth over the surface. This is the inner path that teaches us to prioritize quality over quantity. You seek connections that nourish, that promote growth, that do not demand you set yourself on fire. Contemplative. Spirituality reminds us that true union begins with union with oneself. By protecting your energy, you are waiting for the real connection that honors your living soul. And when it arrives, it will not be full of drama or performance. It will be full of silence, presence, and emotional truth. Therefore, if you have been feeling guilty about wanting space, if you have preferred your own company and been called antisocial, you are not broken. You are awake. Being awake in a sleeping world is not a curse. It is a gift. The gift of clarity, the gift of choosing authentically, and the gift of protecting your energy. Do not get lost in the desperate need for validation. Only your integrity will guide you to the freedom you seek. Honor your solitude, for it is the sacred fortress where your living soul reconnects. Symbolic practice. I invite you to a moment of conscious silence. Close your eyes for a moment. Visualize your energy as a circle of golden light around your body. Feel it complete, inviolable, and completely yours. Now, repeat. My truth is my boundary. I am free and my integrity is non-negotiable. Use this image as a shield in your next interactions. If this uncomfortable truth resonated with you, and if you have chosen authentic solitude instead of falsified connection, subscribe to the channel. For more deep reflections on the psychology of the soul and the inner path, leave a comment. What was the exact moment you realized you needed to protect your energy, and that being authentic was not selfishness, but survival? Your story might be the light someone needs today. And to continue expanding this field of presence, we suggest the video on the card. May it be a gentle breath on your journey. Peace and light.